Hello, welcome to the web chat with Professors Edgar and Peter Shine. I would like to thank our partner Phil Lanier from Coaching Ourselves for making it happen. My name is Viviane Barreto. I am the Associate Dean for Global Strategy at FDC, and I am delighted to host this chat. Hi Phil, could you please say a few words about Coaching Ourselves and our partnership?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Vivian. And hello, everybody. Coaching Ourselves is a business that started with myself and Professor Henry Mintzberg in Montreal. And what we do is we help organizations set up peer coaching groups or peer learning groups for leadership and organizational development. We've been doing this now for 12 years, and we met FDC many years ago now. Vivian and I have been working together, and FDC has been, as many of you know, such a perfect partner to have in Brazil because of their deep set of values about society and humanity, and because of just the easy way we can all work together. And we've had a marvelous partnership bringing Coaching Ourselves to organizations in Brazil.
Thank you, Phil. What do we have to know to make our chat work well? We'll keep, please, I would like to ask you who are participating to keep your mic and video closed. And if you would like to make any question or comment, please click on the chat and write a message, and I'll do my best to accommodate them all and address them, okay? So also, after this chat, we will email a copy of a Coaching Ourselves module written by Ed Shine. And for more information and contact with Edgar and Peter Shine, please access the website ocli.org. Thank you for being here, for joining the web talk. Well, this is a very special day. Not every day we have the chance to connect with someone you're a big fan of, right? Today we are all lucky to have Ed and Peter with us. I am sure you have read some of the 14 books and over 140 articles that Ed has written. Let me start the introductions by Edgar Shine. Professor Ed Shine is a professor emeritus of the MIT Sloan School of Management. He was educated at the University of Chicago, Stanford University, and Harvard University, where he received his PhD in social psychology. Ed has a notable mark on the field of organizational development in many areas. So many contributions he has made to the business world that I could stay here numbering for an hour. Ed is considered the father of organizational culture studies and its three layers: the artifacts of a culture, our symbols and signs, its exposed values, the things we say, we believe, and the most important, its underlying assumptions, the way things really are. He continues to consult with various international organizations on a variety of organizational culture and career development issues. Also, Ed has written Coaching Ourselves modules for very practical companies discussions and leaders development. In 2018, Ed and his son, Peter, who is here with us, they launched the book Humble Leadership: The Power of Relationships, Openness, and Trust, which challenges the current theories of leadership and management. Let me introduce Peter Shine. Peter is a Silicon Valley innovator with over 30 years of experience at large and small companies, including Apple, SGI, and Sun Microsystems, with a focus on corporate development and mergers and acquisitions. Peter is co-founder and COO of the Organizational Culture and Leadership Institute. Peter was educated at Stanford University, BA Social Anthropology, Honors and Distinctions, and Northwestern University, Kellogg MBA, Marketing and Information Management, top student in information management, and the USC Marshall School of Business Center for Effective Organizations. Thank you so much, Ed and Peter. It is an honor to have you here with us. Well,
thank you.
Challenging times.
Glad to be here.
Our pleasure. We've been thinking a lot, you know, this last 2 weeks, how to lead in times of COVID-19. We have so many questions in mind, like how to face crisis, what to do to be prepared after crisis. Yes, it will pass, and we should, you know, we should use all the lessons to become better leaders in the new normal, right? There is a value to take away from this. We believe that we should use crisis to reflect about our business, our behaviors, our values, and positioning. And in difficult times, we keep thinking about what is the role of a real leader. We believe that we will not solve the problem by leaving the decisions like for doctors or for economists or other separate group of people. A small executive group can't collect the information and make decisions quickly enough to respond to this crisis effectively. So we need a strong network of teams that share a purpose and collaborate effectively across groups. As I was talking to Phil and Henry the other day, I strongly believe that the world needs listening, reflection, and dialogue. The world needs leadership. It needs solidarity too. And it really is time to reflect, time to think about all the stakeholders. It is time for disruptions. Well, that thinking demands a lot of humility, and it is key for the success. So today we will talk about humble leadership in times of COVID-19. And to begin our chat, I would like to ask Ed and Peter to please share with us some of your thoughts about the current context and the importance of humble leadership to survive and to overcome it.
Well, that's not a small task because of the intervention of the virus. So I would just underline that we talk about leadership rather than leaders. I think the biggest change I have seen in the last 20 years is the demise of the notion that there's some hero leader out there who's going to fix things. The world is no longer fixable by individuals. It's only fixable by complicated systems of relationships and teams and people working together. And so I think point one should be we have to get over looking for leaders and start thinking of what do we really mean by relational work where we trust each other and communicate with each other and put less value on individual competition and more value on groups. That would be my opening salvo.
And I'd like to just add that when we talk about humility in the Humble Leadership book and then in subsequent work, we're usually quick to point out that what we're talking about is something called here and now humility, that it isn't necessarily a personality characteristic, but it's a recognition that you don't know the answer and the people around you collectively probably can figure it out. And one of the things that we're learning with dealing with this virus is that while we talked about VUCA, that term, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, the uncertainty level that we've all had to face in the last month or so is beyond anything that I've certainly experienced. So much is unclear about what happens in a month, what happens in 6 months. I think we can look ahead to 2 years from now when there's a vaccine, and we think maybe we can be a little bit more certain. But on the other hand, so much will have changed. And so the idea of humble leadership is really starts with embracing that here and now uncertainty that I don't know, and collectively we're going to have to figure it out. I think one of the things that's happening with all of us, and here we are on Zoom, and Zoom has become or Zoom or some variant thereof has become the primary tool that we use for work these days. And so much of what we're doing isn't just learning about our jobs, but it's sort of relearning how to work. And so recognizing in those moments that, wow, this is a little bit weird. This is uncomfortable. The technology works, but it's not perfectly humanly designed. There are glitches. And recognizing that learning in those moments is such an important way of getting through those moments, and capturing those lessons, at least internally. If you don't document them, whatever, at least each one of us is internalizing some of those things, so that the next day we're a little better at it, and the day after that we have figured out how to adjust in ways that that make getting through this uncertainty a little easier from one day to the next.
I would like to add a point to that, and I'm sure by now you have some questions, but this other point strikes me as very difficult. The world has become an internet, and the virus has forced us all to learn how to use it. We were already doing that, but I think the degree to which we have to do it now is astronomically larger. And that creates a very interesting question for me that I don't have the answer to. What does it mean to be trusting when we aren't physically together? What does it mean to be open with each other when we have only an electronic means of communicating, which eventually maybe we will get back to face, but it's also possible that the sacred cow of you can only have a relationship if you're face to face at some point, that cow may die. It may be possible that we're going to have to learn some equivalent to the face-to-face relationship that still nevertheless is trusting and open. And I'm seeing little bits of that in how people communicate, what they put into their emails, more of this kind of face-to-face, at least we see each other at a distance. But to me, that's all a whole new ballgame that we don't yet understand how it will work out.
I'd say that that's very, very interesting. And I had that question in mind. Like when you say in your book that the humble leadership is more based on personal relationships than on transactional role relationships. So I was thinking about what is the impact of isolation and quarantine on the practice of humble leadership? And that's very interesting that you started by addressing like that kind of discussion. And I was also wondering, and I would love Peter to comment on that. Is there already any lesson that we get from that from the Silicon Valley?
Well, I mean, I want to share one anecdote. I heard a couple days ago the CEO of Marvell Technologies, which is a big chip manufacturer. I think they're based in San Jose. Describing how two things happened in the last week or so. One, that they taped out sort of final design for a 5G microprocessor, so critical for next generation communications infrastructure. So the taping out meaning they sort of got to the final design, and they did that all from home. And then he mentioned that they also finalized and filed their 10K, their SEC filing, also from home. And what struck me about that is, I guess in some ways I wasn't surprised. That this was I'm sure in both cases, the technology development process and then the financial compliance process were two things that were on track. They were proceeding, and what the CEO was communicating is that they were able to complete them after the stay-at-home orders went into place. But what really struck me, though, was if we then said, all right, well, what about the end generation chip that you're designing, Marvell, that you've just started conceptualizing? Would it be possible to do that process of starting with the creativity, the initiation of a critical business function like that? Could you do that all from home? And I think that there's been this sense that it tends to be the established processes that are relatively easy to do when you decide that you have to have a team in multiple locations. Or, I mean, we've been doing this work from home thing in Silicon Valley for years. I mean, I've been joking that this stay-at-home thing is not that hard for me because I've been doing it for a decade. But for a lot of people, it's brand new. But back to my point, the idea that you can accomplish a lot of things remotely and in different formats, whether it's voice video, presence, telepresence, all of the different variants that we have. But can you have a truly creative, innovative design session in the same way? I'm not sure about that. We talk a lot here at Stanford about the sort of design thinking and the process of going through that initial design process. And every time you see sort of the iconic images of people going through that design process, they're in the room together. There's noise, there's excitement, there's 15 colors of Post-its all over the wall, and that's what design is. It's this very interpersonal, interactive process. And I really wonder, are we going to find ways to do that in this socially distant world? That's where there's a bit of a fuzzy line for me. I'm not sure we get there. And I would love to hear from any people out there if they have ideas or have seen cases where a really creative, innovative design process was accomplished remotely. It's a really tricky problem.
Yeah,
especially if it involves objects and drawings and physical things that have to be looked at simultaneously. What struck me about what Peter just said is we're right now revising a book, which is one of these processes where there is a lot of history of how to do that. And I think we're able to adapt to how to do this without meetings. But it's because we can exchange the written products back and forth and read it and edit it and send it back and forth. And what Peter's describing isn't that organized. It involves inventing new words, new pictures. And so I think we will have to differentiate what it is we're actually doing and not assume that processes that work for one kind of thing will be equally workable for another kind of thing. When to work at home and when to bite the bullet and put the masks on and get together. That might be much more complicated.
It sort of comes down to that distinction that we talk about between efficiency and effectiveness, that we're going to find lots of ways for this, telepresence world to be much more efficient. We may be much even better at communicating with each other when we're remote, and there's computers and networks in between us. But it is, again, it's that. But can we really be effective in, getting to those ideas that hadn't been thought of? Can we be effective in ways that are really thinking out of the box, or really being, truly creative, when we're, communicating with computers and networks in between us? I'm still not sure about that. I know we can be more efficient. I know there will probably be lots of studies showing how this period of social distancing made us much more efficient at certain things. But the question is whether we can find ways to be effective as well.
Exactly. And building on what you just said, I would like to talk a little bit about trust and openness in the context that we're in. Yes, we can be very productive on one hand, but considering the humble leader and his role in overcoming the crisis right now, what do you think that the leader, the CEO, the head of operation should be aware of regarding trust and openness and the benefits that it can bring to effectiveness in his decision-making process, for example?
Well, I think that the key is to find an equivalent to the behavioral tests. When we say, what is trust? It's that things we expected to happen from other people and that they committed to actually happen. That when someone says, I'm going to tell you what's really going on in the department, and they tell you only what you want to hear, and you later discover that things are a mess down there and that you didn't tell me, then I'm not going to trust you. So I think building trust is quite feasible on the internet if we make it behavioral. If I ask when, let's say, Peter and I are working on this book together, and I say, have you actually edited this to your own satisfaction? And then I read what he's written, and I know that he has a different thought, that he only wrote it because he thought I would like it. That would produce less trust. So we have to learn how to be honest on paper or around commitments we've made to each other. And I don't see any problem doing that. It's slower and maybe more awkward on the internet, but the principle of making commitments, not lying to each other, testing each other would be the same, wouldn't it, on the internet?
Yeah, and if I could add as well, I think the other thing that we talk about in the book is finding times that aren't necessarily work, that aren't work times, for building building a relationship and starting to kind of open the door to trust in ways that are informal And so, you know, if we look kind of out at the memes and the new sort of social innovations, you know, people are talking about, and we've done, our family has done sort of Zoom cocktail parties. And this is a way of essentially using a business tool in a very social, informal way. And you know, I think it's great. I think it's been fun. And so that idea of how do you start to establish that openness and trust, again, in the Humble Leadership book, we sort of imply that you need to have, you know, other contexts in which to do that outside of just a meeting or a one-on-one or a, you know, a 360 feedback session or whatever it ends up being. The process of building that relationship is greatly enhanced if there's a social non-business adjunct to the actual work that you're doing together. And so the question is, are we going to figure out ways that we can use these tools to have a little bit of that informal bonding, that that off-cycle relationship build, just pure relationship building using the same technology? And I think we will, because I mean, we're seeing it in our social lives. It's strange and awkward at first, but you know, I think we'll get used to it. We'll have many months to get used to it.
Well, I'd like to add an example. I have had more conversations with my anthropologist daughter who lives in New Jersey, whom I see maybe twice a year. And then it's always with other family. We barely have time to talk to each other during these visits. I have spent more time talking with her in the last month about serious things as well as fun things. And then her husband gets into the picture, and we are doing exactly what Peter was describing, and I'm finding it very meaningful and brand new. We've always had this option and never used it. Same with FaceTime on the phone. My daughter in Seattle suddenly decided, instead of just calling, always make it FaceTime. And that is a whole different experience. So we are already inventing closeness where we were physically separated already. And maybe that's part of the answer, that the physically apart people are going to get closer. And the people who are close are going to invent other ways for dealing with their physical local isolation. Like, I don't get to see Peter regularly, but we'll have to figure out some other ways to compensate for that.
Even though we live a mile away from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the new road, right?
But I like the innovative thrust. It's forcing us to innovate, and I think that's so important.
Yeah. Ed, I would like to ask you to talk a little bit about the humble inquiry. And that could be of great help for leaders of companies that now are struggling, maybe sometimes thinking that they need to come up with a solution. And I like very much the way you say that it's not going to be just on one person. And what would be the best way to encourage the leaders to get the help that they need to get a suggestion, a solution for their department or their organizations?
Well, let me deal with that first by saying that when people read our statements that they should have closer relationships with each other, they immediately say, well, I can't have close relations with 1,000 people in my company. Well, that's a really stupid excuse, because they can have close relations with their immediate reports. And why people don't see that step one in humble inquiry is to get to know the 5 or 6 or 7 people who are officially reporting to you, and officially in the bureaucracy and hierarchy, you are their boss. Are you telling me you cannot get closer to these 6 people? That you're humanly unable to change your relationship with those 6 people? That's nonsense. If they decided that instead of having them compete for my job, which is the typical hierarchical problem, if I said, look, the 7 of us, the 6 of you and me, we're going to operate this as if we were the board. We're going to be one group. I want to get to know you. And European companies often operate this way. They have just a board with a managing director rather than a CEO. If that boss says to his immediate supports, and that could be anywhere, at a division or anywhere, that boss says, look, I want to get to know you, and I'm so convinced that this will help us be more effective that I'm going to actually hope that as you and I establish a relationship, that you will do the same thing with the people who report to you. And I'm actually going to watch you do that. I'm going to reward you if you get better at building relationships with your immediate reports. So I don't have to worry about 1,000 people. I only have to worry about the immediate layers below me. And that's entirely within my power. I can decide tomorrow to change my relationship to my immediate reports. And I can tomorrow ask them to do the same thing with theirs. And if they indeed will find that it's more effective, then they will do that layer by layer, and gradually the overall norms of what is a good relationship will change. But it has to start with an individual saying, hey, that sounds interesting. I'm going to try it with a couple of my direct reports. Does that make sense? Can you imagine doing that? Can you do it in your own organization?
Yeah, that's very, very, it seems like simple, but we can't get confused about what's simple and what's easy. It demands, I would say that people have to have the intention of doing that, right? Peter, would you like to add something on that based on your experience?
Yeah, I mean, so Ed and I are in the process of revising the Humble Inquiry book, but one thing that won't be revised out of the new work is that Ed had a lot of, well, let's call it positive energy when he wrote the first one. There was a strong intent on his part to sort of raise an issue and get people to think differently about some of those key interactions that you have with the people that you work with. And a lot of it was based around this idea of asking rather than telling, that you know, the US culture tends to be very focused on telling and doing. And so kind of a basic point of the Humble Inquiry book and the one that we're working on now is that we have to recognize that we're so focused on doing and telling, directing, you know, managing, all of these from me to you kind of action words that kind of characterize what we think you know, running businesses is all about, that it obscures the more basic need to sort of ask and gather information that the group can act on and make better decisions. So, you know, in addition to this focusing on closing relationships with the immediate people that you work with, what we've described as shrinking the professional distance, making professional distance no longer a good thing. But in addition to that, it's trying to reset the balance of when do we ask versus when do we tell. And more often we need to be asking people, what do they think? What's on their mind? What's happening? Rather than, you know, telling people what they're going to do today, you know, how they're going to do it, what their objectives are, what key results they're expecting. It's more about resetting the balance between asking and telling.
Thank you. I would like
Could
to
I add
ask.
something?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Let me add something, because it triggers an important point. There is a section in the old book that talks about accessing the artist in you, connecting more with art. And I now think we have to escalate that point, because so much of relational stuff is a dance, and the dance is artistic. And it's not accidental that in today's world, the young people are doing many fewer scripted dances and much more dancing together in groups and individually doing their own thing, but in coordination with each other. And it just occurs to me that I'm going to want to put more of that emphasis into this book, that the way to break out of these cultural scripts, as you said, it's simple but not easy. The reason it's not easy because our culture has so many rules about how work is supposed to happen. And I think we're going to have to say, but work is itself becoming artistic. This group that Peter described, designing something new, is like a theater group. All, you know, maybe there's a director there or whatnot, but they're all full actors. And the theater groups themselves are saying, you know, the script often is improved by what the actors do. And the director says, hey, that's good. I want that line that you just said to be in the script. It wasn't there. So this whole notion of getting outside our work culture seems to me is where we're headed. And using the arts as a example of how we do theater, how we do. Peter added the stuff from the Chicago improv group, Second City.
Yeah.
And how they have substituted, instead of the yes, but, the yes, and, that you're not allowed to say but. You always have to build. And so this may be news to Peter. I'm going to advocate that we put the art stuff up front in that final chapter rather than somewhere in the middle.
I look forward to your redraft.
What?
I look forward to your redraft.
Well, it's amazing to have the father and son exchange here with us. Fantastic. Before I go to the next question, I just would like to tell to the people who are joining us that if you would like to send us some questions, please write it down on the chat and I'll address them, okay? For those of you who maybe have arrived a bit later. Let me ask you another question regarding the impact of humble leadership in corporate culture. And what do you think that it will be the impact of humble leadership in corporate culture in a world after COVID-19? Have you exercised that idea yet?
Well, I mean, I think that you know, one of the central ideas in the Humble Leadership book is to try to, I mentioned it before, but to try to shrink professional distance, to sort of, you know, the idea of professional distance, I think, is something that we kind of invented as a way to scale organizations, to make them very large, but also be able to kind of expand and contract them without it really impacting the human experience at work. So that if we create this professional distance, then we can treat people as resources, and we can expand and contract. And if we're not too close to them, if we maintain that distance, then it's easier to do that. It's, you know, it's easier to expand and contract. I don't think either Ed or I have ever really believed that. That hasn't really been true in my work experience. I've certainly seen it, but so I guess the one of the struggles for me is to think about how, when we, you know, come out of all of this a year or two down the road, will we have gotten to a point where we feel like people are more ready to embrace that idea of, I need to become closer with the people that I work with? Or is this idea of, you know, infinitely remote work going to make it harder for people to say, you know, I need to shrink professional distance? It's it's just, it's a we've got that problem of computers and networks in between us, and that challenge of, at the same time, I know that at some level I'm going to be more effective with my teams if I shrink the distance between us. So, Ed, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I totally agree with that way of looking at it. And for me, it has a particular implication, which is also, as you get older, you begin to be more reflective about what you really do that you're good at. I'm terrible at predicting and absolutely refuse to say what might happen tomorrow or next month. But I'm very good at observing and learning from what I observe. And so this getting closer across distance, I am seeing it. It's happening. I described it happening with my daughter in New Jersey. I have a number of colleagues who are distant, but with whom I have now a closer relationship. I have a couple of clients whom I have never met, with whom I have very effective coaching relationships. So I know that it's possible, and I think we need to learn from what we see rather than trying to either predict or make things happen. That's to me a very powerful message. Don't speculate, but watch very closely and pick up, see little tiny signals of what's happening, and then extrapolate from that what might happen.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, and if I can just add one other thing, Vivian, sorry that.
No, please go ahead, Peter.
We you got me going here. You know, you can sort of, it's crude, but you can divide the world up between introverts and extroverts. And one potential outcome of this could be that the introverts in the organization, and maybe it's, you know, maybe a given organization is sort of 60% extroverts and 40% introverts. It could be that this whole process, we learn how to get introverts, the normally quiet person in the room in a meeting, much more involved than they were beforehand, because so some of those cultural scripts that Ed was describing have been sort of turned upside down by the fact that the normal things that might keep an introvert in a meeting quiet are gone. We're no longer in a meeting together. We're you know, we're staring at our computer. So there are potentially very positive things that could come out of this that we then have to learn and have to sort of code as we're re-scripting how we're going to do the meetings after we, once we start reconnecting in the same place and time.
Yeah, there's a question here that Christiane has written to us, and she writes down that she perceives that leaders of organizations are much more integrated and agile in decision making now. How to reinforce and ensure that this learning continues after crisis? Do you have any idea on that?
If they're doing it right, if they really are building relationships, it's a positive feedback loop. If they're having trouble maintaining something, it means they're not doing it right. So I'm convinced, and maybe that's just our act of faith, is that closer personal relationships lead to better results, and better results give you the positive feedback that you want to keep on and even enhance those relationships. That doesn't mean we become intimate. There is an appropriate level of personalness for getting work done, which is not the same as close friendships or intimate ties with our lovers and family. But when it's working, it's a positive feedback loop. It sustains itself.
Thank you, Ed. I'm going to bring another question now from my colleague, Ken Bardock. He asks, how do you deal with differences in purpose and values? When we all share similar purpose and values, it's easier to have trust, no? How do we create efficiency and effectiveness with others remotely when we don't know about their purpose and values, or even harder, when we don't share the same purpose and values? Would you like to comment?
Well, there's a short answer, and that is you have to find a way to identify the differences. Only when you've identified what is the actual difference, let me use the example with Peter. Let's say we have really different ideas of what a chapter should look like. And the question is, how do we resolve that difference? We each have to write our version, and we each have to read it, and we have to identify where we agree and where we disagree. And then again, in writing, say, well, if we combine this, what it would look like. But it starts with each of us saying what we believe and having then to confront each other and say, is there any point of connection? And make that decision. We can do that remotely. You want to go for this, I want to go for that. If they're really truly different, and if we're in the same organization, then we need to invent a coordination mechanism. Then we go to our boss, or we go to some third party, a consultant, who helps us confront the differences.
The other mechanism that Ed talks about in quite a few of the books is the idea of a cultural island, where you're essentially saying we're starting with a cultural blank slate. We all know that we're coming with differences in points of view and upbringing and values. And the point of the cultural island is to air those out, to bring them out, to actually create a safe space where the differences are the point, so that everybody sees what those differences are, rather than, either trying to pave them over or trying to convince one person that one way is better than the other. the cultural island sort of says, no, the point is that we get together and we raise them, we air them out, we bring them to the fore. And, you know, again, maybe that's going to be a little bit hard to do with, you know, Zoom or Skype or whatever telepresence and collaboration tools we're using. But I think that the basic design, the basic principle still holds, that you're saying, you know, you're creating a safe space to have it not be about work objectives or not be about deliverables, but to have it be about getting together and explicitly trying to air out some of those differences, so that you're not trying to convince anybody of anything, but you are trying to understand where other people are coming from.
The airing out has to be a story, not a position. I mean, we've really learned that when you have people in conflict, what the facilitator or the third party or the mediator has to do is to say, we have to agree that we're going to listen to A, how A got to that position, the whole story. And then we're going to have to listen to B, how B got to that position and the whole story. Because the mutual understanding will not happen at the position level. It will happen at the level of the story.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Peter. Ed, may I ask you to share with the group the reflection you mentioned while we were talking on Monday about like what world kids will be inheriting? I think it's so amazing to have the chance to talk to you, and based on all your experience. And I really appreciate all the inspiration that you are for us when you talk about your worries about the future. And I thought it was very interesting that case that you mentioned, that you were like thinking about. I'm not sure if you were talking, if it was your granddaughter or someone who was going to school, and you were kind of wondering, well, what world is she inheriting? Like, we are all talking about the COVID-19 right now, but what is the future? What are we building? What are we leaving? What is the legacy that the next generation is going to inherit? I would love to hear your comments on that.
Wow, I wish I remembered what I said to you then.
No, Ed, I think you were talking about Stephanie, who, you know, is about to graduate from college.
Oh, yes. All right. Now I'm connected. I think it's very important.
I want to be as brilliant as you when I get to your age, you know. That's my big
I think there's a very important point to be made here, that for me to project what the world will be like for me is interesting but pointless, because my days are limited. So what I find it to be more interesting, if somebody says, what's the future going to be like, is to try to see the future through Peter's daughter, Stephanie, who's what, 22 now, 21, yeah. 22. And she's about to graduate from college, and she's going to face this very different world of what the job market will be and all that. So
she's Ed's youngest grandchild. That's why we're picking on. It's yes, Ed's youngest grandchild. That's why we're picking on Stephanie. Yeah.
And that's a good point. But I'm finding it much more interesting to try to imagine what her world will be like, and not worry about what my world will be like. And I think that's the trap of age. We want to project for ourselves, and we don't realize that these new generations are coming into something fundamentally different. What they learn, how they learn, what they experience is totally different. And if we as government don't understand that, that's why we screw everything up. We produce policies and stuff that works for us and may be completely irrelevant and bad for the new generations coming along. So one random thought along those lines, one of the few things I've heard good in that regard is the idea that all this money that we're now producing to help the economy not tank because of the virus, if that were turned into education and fixing the environment and fixing the infrastructure and creating both jobs and educational programs around that, that could be very exciting.
Thank you. Peter, would you like to add something?
Well, it's, you know, we're talking about my daughter. So there's an edge to it that, you know, of course, I'm just sort of, you know, existentially concerned about what happens when you graduate, you know, college in the year of COVID-19. It's a weird thought. And, you know, she's not alone. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are sort of, you know, trying to figure it out. And I guess the good news for her is that she wasn't sort of locked into something that went away. I think I feel bad for the MBAs and undergrads who had something locked in that all of a sudden is completely turned upside down by the situation that we're in. So, you know, I do think that it is interesting to watch how her access to information, her access to media, how she communicates with people is, to Ed's point, is completely different. And if we're sort of not mindful of that and sort of taking heed of that as managers and leaders, we're gonna you know, we're gonna have a lot of unhappy employees on our hands. There's something very important about kind of watching millennials and Gen Z and how they work, because work hasn't necessarily been designed for those new ways. So maybe one of the things that comes out of this crisis is that we're able to completely rethink work design for you know, the 20-somethings who have grown up, who are digital natives for one thing, and grown up in a completely different way of processing and accessing information and making decisions. It's if we're not really thinking about how they do it, we're just going to have an aging work population and
Thank you.
lose creativity. Yeah.
Well, once we're coming to the closing part of our session, I would like to ask Ed and Peter if you would like to leave a message of encouragement for all those leaders who are here joining our conversation and really are struggling, doing an amazing job to survive and overcome this crisis that we're all in.
Well, my first thought in response to that is, whether it's digital or face-to-face or whatever the form, get to know your people better and establish closer relationships with them.
Yeah, and maybe related to that, just sort of mechanically take 5 or 10 minutes at the end of every meeting or every hour and a half or whatever, and just say, how are we doing? You know, is this working? Just be very, you know, use this opportunity where the world has been turned upside down to take, you know, a few minutes outside of the agenda and ask ourselves, you know, is this, are we getting there? Is this working? Are people getting comfortable? Because we'll right around the time that we get comfortable with all of this, of course, we'll go back to the old way. But or maybe not. I mean, but the point being, take some time, because this is hard. It's stressing everybody out. Take some time to allow yourself to express your stress, and you know, share it, get it out there. It'll form tighter bonds with the people you work with, for one thing. But also, we can't keep it all bottled up inside. We have to sort of let it out a little bit, or it's really going to drive us nuts.
Thank you. And well, for those of you who arrived a bit later, maybe you were not here when I was introducing Phil Lanier. Phil Lanier is our partner from Coaching Ourselves. Phil is the president of Coaching Ourselves, and he's the one who made the bridge between FDC and Ed and Peter. So once again, thank you very much. Phil, would you like to say some words before we end our conversation?
I'll just say thank you very much to everybody. And I will add, as somebody who's running a small business and a business through this time, it's really, really, I don't know how to put this. It's hard, it's difficult. And I had many sleepless nights and lots of anxiety. But there's lots of opportunity, and there's lots of things that we as owners of businesses can do to help people. And they have all these new needs. So it got me very energized. And now I've been working very, very hard to do all sorts of things for all these clients and customers and people that we work with. So we got to do our part. It's all good. It will work out.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, our time is over. I would like to thank you once again for your time and for being part of this chat. I would like to thank Ed, Peter, Phil. Thank you very much, with all my respect and admiration. It's been amazing to have the chance. It's really, really an honor to be able to host and moderate a conversation with you. Thank you very much. And for you who are joining us next week, we'll have a conversation on April 8th. It's going to be at 4 p.m. Brazil time. We'll be with Professor Henry Mintzberg. And I'll be very happy to have you with us again. So thank you so much. And I wish you all take care, stay healthy, and let's do the best we can to have a better world. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Very well done.
Great experience to be able to talk to Brazil.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.